everyone who is here for the experience part, and I do want them back, but I have some Islamic prayer beads called tasbihs. So who's ever here gets first dibs on using a tasbih. And I'm sorry, I may run out even before I get through the room. So who would like to use a tasbih? And people use them when they are doing something called Dhikr. So although I am a professor at Loyola, I am not going to do like a professory thing. We're going to do the experiential thing. And my talk will be just a background to the practice. So take my presentation as a background to what we are going to, inshallah, experience together. So the Sufis say in terms of their practice that there are three things: the zaman, makan, and ikhwan. That means the time, the place, and the company. So whatever the experience is, it's in the context of the time, the place, and the company. So our first, and this is why I wanted as many people possible to be here with the start, because I have a sense that we need to become aware of the company and the time and the place. And we do that through the breath. Because the key to the experience is the breath, and the key to everything is the divine breath, because God breathed the ruh, the spirit, into the human being. And the Sufi practice and the path of return is through the breath. So initially, I just want us to breathe together, and I'm sure some of you have your own contemplative tradition and your practice. And by the way, anything I do or say, you don't have to do it. You don't have to do it the way I do it. You know, you can be in your own space, right? So don't feel any compulsion. And later on when we do the practice, there's some like head movements. If you're not used to head movements, be careful of your neck the first time around, things like that. So just, you know, do what's comfortable for you. So I'm saying just a few breaths together as a group. In for, and I'll start the count, just telling you when, you know, in for 4, hold for 8. Don't like holding for 8, don't hold for 8, but in for 8, out for 4. We'll just do several breaths together so that we get that sense of being the ikhwan, or the, you know, the collectivity, who's ever here for the experience. Because a lot of Sufi experiences, dhikrs that Azam was talking about, they're done in a group. You know, we used to say he talked about the 70s, we used to say in the 60s and 70s, you know, contact high, group energy, collective buzz, whatever. So, okay, so the first, so I'll say in 4, and you can close your eyes if you want. Hold. Out 4. In 4. Hold. Out 4. In 4. Hold 8. Out 4. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. We begin in the name of Allah, most merciful and compassionate. So I'm going to tell you the background of some of the practices that we do. Azam was talking about the history and the development of Sufism and the Sufi theorists. So from an Islamic perspective, Sufism was the path or the inner knowledge that was revealed to the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, along with the Quran. He passed that on to Ali. Of course, Ali and the people of the household are the heart of the Shia tradition and the heart of the Sunni tradition and the heart of Sufism as well. The Sufi theorists, so I'm going to talk about a little Sufi theory behind the Dhikr. And Azim already gave you a little background on Junaid Baghdadi and on al-Ghazali. And later on, we're going to hear more about Ibn al-Arabi, who's called a Sufi philosopher, or some refer to him as a Theosophical Sufi. So we'll briefly encounter him. And of course, you see Rumi over here. So I'd like to say what you get out of this chart, and I got to remember to be fast because I have a limited amount of time. So forgive me if I go quickly. I would have liked to take questions as I go along, but in the interest of time, I think we need to save that for now, so I hope I don't mix you up. But notice here, you get both a historical and a geographical, the spread of Sufism across Asia, eastward to the Indian subcontinent, and of course also to Southeast Asia and to Africa as well. And you get what I call the strata of Sufism. So like any other religious and spiritual tradition, there's a historical development that I like to compare to a geological, you can excavate, like the early Sufis were ascetics, and then you have the ecstatics, and then you have the theorists and the philosophers and the poets. And it's like nothing goes away. All of those potentials for spiritual experience remain, but they keep getting enhanced and built upon. So these Sufi theorists that I were talking about, the 10th and 11th century was their heyday, where they wrote manuals of kind of how to be a Sufi and talked about the method or the tariqah. And an important element of this Sufi theory was Sufi psychology, and the psychology of what the Sufis call a state, a hal. So a hal is the experience, right? A hal is that moment when you get it. And then over time, there was the idea of a spiritual itinerary of permanent cultivation, shall we say, of capabilities such as patience or love of God. And actually, one of the highest stages that a Sufi could attain was the stage of bewilderment. And then Azim mentioned the idea of fana, annihilation, the loss of the self, union in the divine, and then bringing that realization back to the world to benefit humanity. So in Sufism, experience is very important. There's a famous story about Rumi, right? That he was an accomplished professor and he had 300 students who hung on his every word. And one day he was coming home after the lecture with all of his notes and books, and he was accosted by the wild dervish Shamsa Tabriz, who grabbed all Rumi's materials and threw them into a nearby well, or some say into a fire. And Rumi said, "My knowledge, what have you done? You've destroyed it." And Shams said, "If your knowledge could be taken away so easily, what good is it?" So that's like the book knowledge, right? So there is this current, there's all this Sufi theory and books and stuff, but it's really about the experience. Like there's another Sufi story, some have attributed to Al-Ghazali, that Al-Ghazali said, the knowledge of regular people is like you say to them, "There's a fire over there." Yeah, there's a fire over there. But then there's the knowledge of the intellectuals and the theologians. "There's a fire over there." "Yeah, prove it to me. What's it combusted of? What temperature is it burning at? How high are the flames?" "Well, if you can prove to me logically that there's a fire over there, then I'll accept it." But the Sufi, you say there's a fire over there, the Sufi goes and plunges his or her hand into the fire and gets burned. And then it's like, I know that there is a fire. I have experienced it. That is the zawq. That is the taste, which is the essence, because otherwise it's just call. So there's hal and call. Hal is when you get it, you got it. It's there. Call is like talking about it. it might just be talk. So in the Sufi psychology, I could say a lot, but in interest of time I can't. But I noticed like this term, the nafs. Azim was talking about the term, and the Quran talks about the nafs. But you've got to realize that nafs, it can mean soul. But some of those translations, they sounded kind of odd, like the bad part of your soul. But we think soul is kind of good, right? So realize that nafs, it can mean different levels of the soul, and sometimes it should be translated as the self, as in selfishness, or even the ego. That's the one that the Sufis are bashing, the illusion of the ego. And I can't resist the walnut thing. So the walnut story, there's a wonderful take on this in the writer on Gnostic stuff and spirituality, Jacob Needleman. He says, you know, the walnut thing, like imagine that somebody comes from outer space, the proverbial man from Mars, and the first thing he finds on Earth is a walnut. And he's like, oh, what is this thing? What do you do with this? The Freudian view of the walnut is, oh, like, I get it, this shell is really important, otherwise the walnut's gonna get destroyed. So you better take care of that shell and, you know, build it up and don't let it, you know, defend it, otherwise something bad might happen, you might have a breakdown. But the Sufi or the spiritual view of the walnut is, right, you're supposed to plant it. It's not about the shell, it's about that potential, right, for growth and realization. So that's the Sufi psychology, and of course the psychology of authentic spiritual traditions. So don't get overwhelmed here, but I want to point out that the Sufis do get kind of technical, and they talk about different levels of, like the ego level of the soul, and then going up even to the soul that is pleasing to God, and most of these are referred to in the Quran, that there's a different kind of nafs, there's a different level. So finally, O contented soul, return to your Lord, satisfying and at peace. So the Sufi path is going from the ego level of the boundaries up to the releasing those boundaries and being at peace and unity with the divine. This is another, diagram. So there are practices to cultivate the soul. Azim mentioned Mohasabi's idea of a kind of ascetic self-accounting every night. But there's also, in addition to sort of things that you can do in your head to cultivate awareness, there are experiential practices, such as the Dhikr, or the awakening. There is a kind of Sufi meditation called muraqabah. There is the relationship to the Sufi guide or teacher, as Azim mentioned. If you have your murshid, Sufism is an initiatory tradition, like Hindu yoga with gurus or Tibetan Buddhism. You find a spiritual master, you take the hand of the master in initiation, and it's like you're getting this spiritual charge that goes all the way back to the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, in the Sufi tradition. So you're able to benefit from that inner knowledge and that energy, the spiritual component of the tradition. So Sufi philosophy, I'd mentioned that there's sort of the Sufi asceticism or personal cultivation, but in later Sufism, you have a very rich understanding developed by because some of you are probably familiar or interested, I'm going to mention it, Neoplatonic thought. The way that there's a descent, or the Sufis call an emanation, or even a breathing from the level of the divine into this world. So Sufis are on a path of return. It says in the Quran, indeed we are from Allah, and to God we return. So there's like an itinerary of return that involves wisdom or gnosis of the different elements of the divine names. God breathed with mercy into all of us, right? The Quran says God breathed the Spirit into Adam. So Sufis are on a path of seeking, that's this term, suluk, returning back to God. But you know, in spirituality, you can be an aware and conscious seeker who's trying to return. But sometimes you just get zapped by God. You may not even be trying or aware. You just get it. It's what they call in Zen like a mini satori, right? We are capable of having satori or awakening in any second. We're actually being awakened every second. But normally we don't notice it. And then just once in a while, it's like you get this, But when you're on the path of suluk, you find a way to build on those moments of awakening or enlightenment, right? So part of the background of the practice is to give you that taste, however momentary, right? To awaken the heart to the spiritual path. So there are different levels of so this is the philosophy in the interest of time. I cannot unpack it all, but notice one goes from the sphere of the divine essence to the names of Allah that are breathed into the world, to actions. And then there's this very important, in later Sufi thought, the idea of the world of images, what are sometimes called the barzakh, like the place between the divine, the mind of God, we could say the mind of God and physical manifestation. So the Sufis or the mystics, through spiritual practice, learn how to be more aware of and involved with that sphere of manifestation. That's where dreams, visions, these images that have not yet come into physical reality, that one can, if you will, do spiritual traveling in those planes. So I like, this is based on Ibn Arabi. You're going to hear about Ibn Arabi later. This is from a book on his mystical astrology. So you see this kind of whole cosmos. You know, the idea of the signs is very important in the Islamic tradition. The Quran says the signs of God are on the horizon and in yourself. So you learn, it's like the mini satori thing, right? Like you're seeing those signs, yeah. And then you are meditating on the depth of those signs within yourself, right? So there's this like outer inner, right? The macrocosm, the microcosm. And of course, this is like the cosmology behind the Sufi experiences. So this is actually from an article I wrote on an 18th century Sufi Shah Waliullah, who's diagramming what are called the subtle spiritual centers. So we were talking about the nafs, and the idea is that in addition to our physical body, I'm sure some of you are know about the idea of like the astral body, right, or bodies of light, or subtle bodies. So in Sufi psychology, part of the meditation and the breath and the practices are the awakening and the moving of energy around these subtle spiritual centers. And some of the practice we're going to do, notice down here you have fire, earth, air, and water. And then you have Azim had diagrammed for us the ruh, the spirit, the divine breath, the heart. And of course, this is the subtle heart, which is related to the emotional heart, the aql. And then, so this is showing actually what this is purporting to diagram. This is the level of the divine breath. The divine breath is what animates each one of our individual personalities, and we kind of live at the level of the body in this world through a process of digestion and refinement of the fire, earth, air, and water. So we're kind of, we, the human beings, are the barzakh, or this intermediary plane between the angelic and the animalistic, as Al-Ghazali would say. And we can be aware of that upper, or we can be drawn down to the lower. The Quran says, in the voice of God, we created the human being in the best form. But then we reduced the human to the lowest of the low, who except for those who believe in God and do good works. So the Sufi path is to fulfill that perfection, that form, that best form, which is a potential within all of us. And so this is the enlargement of the lower part of that diagram. So dhikr, or the remembrance of God, I could talk about it as a concept, a practice, and a state or experience. We're not going to talk about it much longer because I'm going to run out of time. So the practice of dhikr involves, as was mentioned, the repetition of pious phrases. It can be done individually sitting down. And by the way, all Muslims perform dhikr. The Quran talks about it a lot. I don't have time to read all the quotes. But in Islamic theology, a central element is the idea of remembrance, because there's a concept, some of you may have heard of it, called the primordial covenant. In a time before time, every soul that would ever come into existence stood before God. And God asked, "Am I not your Lord?" And everyone answered, "Yes, indeed you are." So we have all recognized God already. We have already, we already had the state. We already got it. But we come into this world and we forget. So we are on a path of return through being reminded by the divine signs in ourselves and on the horizon, in the revealed books and in the book of nature. So we are all on that path, voluntarily or involuntarily, consciously or unconsciously. We are all on a path of return. That's why everything in the universe is Muslim. Muslim means submitted to God. I say small m Muslim. Everything is part of that process. So there's different distinctive forms of dhikr among different kinds of Sufis, and the idea is cultivating that state of awareness. Personally, these were some of the Quranic phrases. We can always talk about that later. But there are some nice sayings of the Prophet. Dhikr is the polish for the heart. Or there's a Sufi saying, "A breath without the remembrance of God is wasted." The Quran says, "Remember me," God said, "remember me and I will remember you." So God consciousness through a dhikr. So a dhikr is Islamic, it's Sufi. Azim mentioned the Chishti order, so we have kind of a Chishti thing going on here. Indian Sufi practices, I'm an initiate in the Chishti order myself. This is the shrine in Ajmer of one of the Chishtis. So the Chishti zikr, the full Chishti zikr, there's something called Baraso, that's Urdu. It means 1200, but we're not going to do 1200, don't worry. And it involves breathing and head movements. And at more complicated levels, there can be meditations and concentrations. And now, inshallah, we're going to experience the Chishti zikr. So however you're comfortable, I think we're going to do it on our chairs so everyone's comfortable, unless somebody really wants to get down and sit cross-legged. And actually, in the Chishti tradition, you start the dhikr sitting in a circle, so we're kind of, I'll be half the circle, unless people want to move around and make a full circle. And again, this is to do whatever you are up for doing. Now, it is going to take me a couple of minutes to explain it, and then we're going to do it, whoever wants to do it. The dhikr is done, the words of the Chishti dhikr are the shahada, the Islamic, my mic just got in my scarf here. The Islamic profession of faith. There is no God but God. So I guess you have to learn the Shahada, and by the way, that's universal, right? Our concentration here, because I have to tell you, say La ilaha illallah. There is no God but God. It means there is no God but God. Now, of course, Allah means God in Arabic, not a different God, but the universal God, right? God of the universe. But again, it's your comfort. If you don't want to say La ilaha illallah, You may say whatever is beautiful and meaningful to you, pointing you towards the highest ideal, the ultimate being. Fair enough? You notice there's a lot of la, ilaha, illah, Allah. Yes, if you're comfortable, maybe we should repeat it together a few times. I'll say it again. The is the vibration of the heart, the subtle center of the heart. La, ilaha, illah, Allah. La, ilaha, illah, Allah. La, ilaha, illah, Allah. La, ilaha, illah, Allah. Does everybody feel that they, okay. So now there's the movements, and I guess it's sort of like teaching in the like your left and my right, and so we'll start on the left side, and I'll do the movement so you can see it, but you'll be starting, it's a mirror image, right? So you say, La ilaha illah Allah. La ilaha illah Allah. So the phrase illah Allah means except God. And la ilaha illa Allah. So the first part of it, I nearly got that backwards, but it's good. The first part, la in Arabic means no. La, no, la. La ilaha. So this part of the Shahada is called the negation. Somebody was talking about like negative mysticism, negation and affirming. So here one is negating the world or negating the ego with the first movement, like La ilaha, like you're throwing away the ego and the world. La ilaha. Let's just do La ilaha together a few times. How's that? La ilaha. La ilaha. La ilaha. Is everybody comfortable with La ilaha? Question?
Are we turning to our left shoulder or to our right shoulder?
You're starting on your left.
Or on our left.
La ilaha. And your head ends up being raised a bit, okay? La ilaha. And now we'll practice, and the second part is called the affirmation of the divine. It's also the movement of bringing the divine consciousness into the heart of your being. So we'll do illah, Allah. So notice I raise my head on the Allah. So the illah is the strike. Remember I said that there's a number of movements in Dhikr, like how many strikes you do? So this one you're going, illah, that's the accept, so you're bringing that into your heart, illah, Allah. And then the Allah is, then you're like holding the divine consciousness. So that's basically the zikr. So let's do the full movement a few times. So we, together to make sure we're in a unison. So you follow me. Right? You do the same, everybody tries to do it in the same rhythm. That's what I meant. La ilaha illah Allah. La ilaha illah Allah. Now, with the movements, you notice there's also breath involved. And I'm not, I think you will naturally come into the rhythm of when you need to breathe. La ilaha illah Allah. So I usually breathe La ilaha. I usually breathe right before I do the illah Allah. And we do it, very respectfully, right? We're aware of that kind of being in touch with the divine breath while we do that. So we will do that, and I'll use my hands. So I lent people some prayer beads. Normally, remember I said you do like 1,200 times. I was going to reduce it to 100, but I think maybe Level 1 we'll do 33 times. You know, why do we do all these odd numbers? Because God is one, and God likes things that are kind of like prime numbers, you know, unique things. So we'll do, not that 33 is prime, but it's an odd number, odd numbers. So usually the beads, somebody asked me how many beads, 99, the 99 names of God, or 101. 101 is considered a very auspicious number because it's referring to that unity and uniqueness of Allah. So first we will do 33, La ilaha illallah. Then we will have silence because that will, inshallah, give you a bit of the hall. It will give you a state in which you can experience that meditation, that light, that tranquility. So I'm not going to say anything, I'm just going to let you be there for a minute or two. Then if you're ready, we can do the second part, which is just the illah, la, illah, la, illah, la. Everybody already knows the second part, right? And then I'll tell them we're going to do the second part, then illah, la. That's really powerful, okay? And then we'll end up by saying, Hu, Hu, Hu. You know, Allah, Who, He, It. Hu. Now notice there's a difference between saying Hu and letting the breath kind of vibrate out your lips. So let's do a few Who's just to practice, okay? Hu. Hu. Hu is connected with the throat center. And you might notice here, some people are into yoga and tantra and stuff. Of course, the Sufis used to hang out, you know, with, this is an Indian Sufi tradition. So there's some syncretism here, or some mutual learning, shall we. Is everybody ready? In the interest of time, we must move ahead. So, inshallah, do whatever is good. If you get lost or whatever, just do, you know, think of the divine and breathe, okay? So we'll start with La ilaha illallah. I'll count on my fingers. Oh, your fingers, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. You know, that's 15, then you start. But you don't have to count because I'm counting. So if you like to count along, those of you with the tasbihs, you hit your first bead. You notice that they have bigger beads, you know, along them. If you're you hit your first bigger bead at number 33. That's why they're designed that way. Okay, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Everybody concentrate. La ilaha illa Allah. 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 La ilaha illallah, 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 la ilaha illallah. La ilaha illallah, 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 la ilaha illallah. La ilaha illallah, la ilaha illallah,
La ilaha illallah. 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 La ilaha illa Allahu.
Feel the energy in the heart. Watch the breath. If you turn your eyes upward, you may be aware of light or energy. Your consciousness expanding. Over the top of your head. Hold the focus and watch the breath. Ameen. Alhamdulillah, all praises be to Allah.